Concluded. Members can take their seats. Questions without notice. The Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm that since deposing Malcolm Turnbull, he's lost Wentworth in his majority, lost the member for Chisholm, ensured just 10 sitting days in the next 8 months? Can the Prime Minister also confirm that earlier today he lost control of himself, delivering one of the most hysterical press conferences in Australian political history? Why isn't Malcolm Turnbull still Prime Minister? Because none of this happened under him.
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. When it comes to losing control, the Labor Party lost control of our borders and they should be ashamed of it.
The member for Brisbane.
My question is also to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister update the House on how the government's been able to implement strong policies that protect Australia's borders? What are the risks of failed alternative approaches?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Brisbane for his question. The members on this side of the House, when we came into government in 2013, confronted one of the most difficult policy challenges that a government could face. Not only did we have to do with the fiscal and financial wreckage of what the Labor Party had left us back in 2013, not only did we have to do with a carbon tax they promised not to introduce, but then introduced in one of the greatest defiances we've seen of the Australian people in the lie they told to the Australian people prior to that election, Mr Speaker. But the carnage and horror of what the Labor Party allowed to happen on our borders and seas to our north should be to their eternal shame. And so when we came to government, we did what we said we would do. We said we would stop the boats, Mr Speaker, and put an end to this horrific tragedy, and that is exactly what we did. Now, those opposite tried to stop us. Those opposite the Labor Party mocked us. The Labor Party said it could never happen, that you could never implement the measures that we said we could. And we said three things. We said we would turn boats where it was safe to do so, and we have. We said we would have offshore processing, and the mess of offshore processing that was left to us by the Labor Party. You never get someone to implement something they don't believe in because they always stuff it up. And that is exactly what the Labor Party did when they were dragged kicking and screaming to introduce offshore processing, and the mess we inherited from them, we were able to clean up, Mr Speaker, and ensure that we have maintained that system over the last 5.5 years. And we said we would introduce temporary protection visas, restore them, and we did, and they are legislated, and the Labor Party wants to reverse them, Mr Speaker. They never learn the lessons from their failures, ever. It was in August of 2008 when the Labor Party, cocky, new in government, thinking they knew everything, that there was no risk, decided to abolish temporary protection visas. They thought there'd be no consequences. 50,000 people turned up on 800 boats and 1,200 people at least died as a result of that decision. And now, Mr Speaker, the Labor Party want to do it all again. If they come back into government, cocky and arrogant as they are, they want to come and do it all again. Number one, they will abolish temporary protection visas. They've already proved it. Today, they have made very clear that they will abolish offshore processing as we know it, Mr. It'll all go. It will all go. And if anyone thinks that this weak Leader of the Opposition would turn a boat back where it was safe to do so, they're kidding himself. He hasn't got the medal for it.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Is the Prime Minister aware that yesterday Queensland LNP leader Deb Frecklington said about the government's plans to force Queensland to privatise its electricity assets, the Prime Minister's plan is out of touch. Queenslanders want lower power prices, but they don't want asset sales. Isn't the Leader of the Prime Minister's Queensland party correct when she says that the Prime Minister's plans are completely out of touch?
The Treasurer.
Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition refers to the LNP leader in Queensland, Deb Frecklington. So I'll share with the House her statement. LNP leader Deb Frecklington has welcomed confirmation that the federal government's legislation to prohibit misconduct in the energy sector will not allow Queensland's electricity assets to be sold. We welcome efforts to stamp out misconduct and ensure the lowest possible prices for consumers. Queenslanders want lower prices, but they don't want asset sales, Mr. Speaker. And then this is what is difficult for the Leader of the Opposition from Deb Freckleton. Unfortunately, the Palaszczuk government has been using electricity as a secret tax for years, Mr. Speaker. Labor is drunk on the revenue this secret tax generates, and according to its own budget, will rip off more than $8.5 billion from Queensland electricity customers over 5 years. So which side is the Leader of the Opposition on? On the side of Queensland consumers or on the side of Queensland energy companies and the state government? And she goes on. And she goes on. Instead of lowering prices, the Palaszczuk Labor government is solely focused on profit maximisation and has allowed government-owned generators to abuse their market power and to price gouge, Mr. Speaker. And it goes on, and this is probably the most relevant statement for the Leader of the Opposition from Deb Freckleton, because she says, Bill Shorten, the Leader of the Opposition's reckless 45% emissions reduction target, will, according to Queensland's Labor's own expert panel on renewable energy, cause the early closures of Queensland coal-fired power stations. So, Mr. Speaker, Deb Freckleton has a lot to say today. She does. She has a lot to say. She says that the Leader of the Opposition is sending power prices up for Queenslanders.
Described him as reckless.
She says about the blue-collar workers in Queensland at those coal-fired power stations that Labor is selling them out, Mr. Speaker. And she says she's on the side of the Liberal and National government at the federal level are doing everything they can to lower power prices. Mr. Speaker, this legislation is a test. This legislation is a clear test of the Leader of the Opposition. Will he continue to be a proxy for big business and big energy companies, or will he join with us in stamping out misconduct and ensuring the lowest possible energy prices for Australian families and businesses?
The member for Latrobe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister outline to the House how the government is acting to keep Australians safe from those seeking to do harm? What are the consequences of alternative approaches?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for Latrobe for his question and his service to Australia in the cause of national security, not just as a member of this place, but as a policeman in Victoria who has worked in the area of counter-terrorism. He knows what he's talking about, Mr. Speaker, and that's why he's been so pleased to be part of the government that is absolutely committed to keeping Australians safe and doing what is necessary in terms of legislative powers that support police, ASIO and other security agencies to ensure that terrorists and organised criminals and pedophiles and others are not able to exploit the weaknesses in our laws to get on with their evil business. Now, we have brought legislation into this place to ensure that those agencies can get access to the encrypted communications of terrorists, pedophiles and organised criminals. Now, we've been on this for months and months. It's gone through a committee process, and in this place today, the Labor Party are frustrating the passage of that bill through this place for one simple reason: to try and play political games in an effort to try and embarrass the government and undermine border protection laws in this country, Mr. Speaker. Don't tell us that the Labor Party is in lockstep with the government when it comes to national security, Mr. Speaker. We're not in step. We're not even on the same page. The Labor Party, when it comes to national security, are unwilling travellers, Mr. Speaker, very unwilling travellers. And our government will continue to focus on delivering the laws and the powers that will keep Australians safe. But for the sake of a headline, for the sake of a vote in this place to play tricky politics, Mr. Speaker, they are prepared to sell out national security for a TV grab, Mr. Speaker. That is the character and the mettle of the Leader of the Labor Party. And he has been tested over the last 24 hours, Mr Speaker, and he has been found wanting. 30 years ago was the last time, I'm advised, that the opposition has sought to go through a bill clause by clause. 30 years ago. It's an old trick, but it's just as ugly, Mr Speaker, when it's particularly being used to delay the important national security legislation which the Labor Party has had to be dragged to. They have had to be dragged to when it has come, Mr Speaker. Slowing down the divestment legislation, Mr Speaker, as a political tactic to ensure that these other measures cannot be addressed. Now, Mr Speaker, this is very disappointing. It is incredibly disappointing, but the Australian people know who they can trust when it comes to keeping them safe. It's the Liberal and Nationals Party. The Labor Party, their form is too well known, Mr Speaker.